Ever wondered why some court cases feel like reruns? Like, haven't we seen this before?
Oh, absolutely. The legal world has a thing for precedent, that's for sure.
And that's exactly where we're diving in today, exploring a legal principle that's all about courtroom déjà vu. It's called stare decisis.
Ah, stare decisis. It's the idea that courts should generally stick to their previous rulings, especially when dealing with similar cases.
So, kind of like a legal compass, keeps those judgments consistent and predictable.
Precisely. It's about ensuring some stability in the legal world, right? We
Yep.
don't want judgments changing with the wind.
Makes sense. But why is that stability so important? What's the big deal if things shift a bit?
Well, think about it. People need to be able to rely on the law, to know what's expected of them. How can they do that if the rules are always in flux? It's about predictability, fairness. Imagine the chaos if legal decisions were constantly changing.
Okay, yeah, I can see where you're going with that. No one wants to play a game where the rules change every 5 minutes.
Exactly. And that's what stare decisis helps to prevent. It brings some order to the system.
So it's basically saying, look, we've already decided this, and we're sticking to it unless there's a really, really good reason not to.
You got it.
But stare decisis, it's not the only legal concept dealing with past cases, right? We've also got things like claim preclusion and issue preclusion. How do those fit in?
Ah, good point. They sound very similar, but have some distinct meanings.
Yeah.
Think of it this way. Stare decisis is like setting the rules for a board game everyone playing has to follow them. Preclusion, on the other hand, that's more about what happens after a specific game between two specific players ends. It's settled, done, and dusted.
Interesting. So stare decisis is shaping the entire legal landscape, while preclusion is more about those specific cases, the players involved.
Exactly. Big difference, although people often mix them up. Let's say, for example, a company gets hit with a lawsuit for a faulty product. They're found liable.
Okay, I'm following.
That finding, it's binding on them in any future cases about that same product, that same issue.
So they can't just keep getting sued for the same thing over and over.
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that, but yeah, that's preclusion in action. But here's the thing. That doesn't mean every company making a similar product would automatically face the same outcome, and that's where stare decisis and its broader implications come in.
Got it. It's about the bigger picture, the overall rules of the game, not just one specific match. So we've got this idea that courts, to keep things consistent, they should generally follow precedent. Makes sense. But what happens when the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, decides to overturn its own past decisions?
Whoa, now you're talking about a real legal plot twist, because it does happen, and it's a huge deal.
Rightfully so. So how does that work?
Well, the 1992 case of Planned Parenthood v. Casey, that's a perfect example. It really gave us a framework for understanding when the Supreme Court might actually say, okay, we got it wrong.
All right, I'm all ears. What's the secret formula for overturning precedent?
It's not exactly a magic formula, but more like a set of 4 key questions the court considers. First,
Mm-hmm.
has that old rule just become totally unworkable, like it's just not functioning in the real world anymore?
So if it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, it might be time for a change. What else do they consider?
Right. Second, the court asks, would sticking to that old rule cause some serious hardship, some real unfairness?
Because people are making decisions based on the law as it stands, right? Suddenly changing the rules of the game, that's got to have consequences. It's like you're suddenly playing a different game, but with all the same old pieces on the board. Not exactly fair to the players, is it?
Not at all. And that's why that second question is so important. But there's a third, too. This one gets at whether the principle behind that old rule, is it even relevant anymore? Is it gathering dust on a shelf somewhere, or is it still very much in play?
So if everyone's basically ignoring the old rule anyway, maybe it's time for a formal update.
Exactly. And that brings us to the fourth question. This one might be the most important of all. Have the underlying facts just changed so much that the rule just doesn't make sense anymore?
So like a law about sending telegrams, probably not super useful in the age of instant messaging.
Exactly.
Are there any real-world cases where that last question, that one about changing facts, actually led to overturning precedent?
Absolutely. Yeah, the 2007 case of Legion v. PSKS, that's a great example. The court took a look at a long-standing rule about price fixing, decided it was just outdated in today's marketplace, in today's world. It's like trying to navigate, I don't know, rush hour in a busy city using a map from the 1950s.
Wow, yeah.
The roads might be the same, but everything else has changed.
Right, the traffic patterns, everything. Okay, that's a great analogy. But this all kind of raises a big question for me. if overturning precedent, if that's such a big deal, why even bother? Wouldn't it just be easier to, let sleeping legal dogs lie?
Well, it's all a balancing act, isn't it?
Hmm?
Stare Decisis is about respecting the past, respecting those previous decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also about acknowledging that the world changes. The law has to be able to adapt with it, to adapt to new realities. We need a legal system that is both stable,
Right.
but also adaptable, right?
Yeah.
One that can respond to new challenges, new ideas, evolving social values, all of that.
So it's like this tightrope walk between honoring those past decisions and making space for necessary changes.
Exactly. Overturning precedent is not something to be taken lightly. It has ripple effects,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
throughout the entire legal system.
Right. Right. Because countless future cases will be affected by it.
Absolutely.
So how do we decide when it's the right call? Is there a cheat sheet somewhere, a legal pro-con list?
Well, the Casey case, it gave us those 4 guiding questions, right? And those questions really all come down to one crucial question. Is there a really compelling reason to deviate from what's been established? Like a really, really good reason.
So it's not just about disagreeing with an old rule. There has to be some significant reason, right? Like real harm is being done, or the rule just doesn't make sense anymore in today's world. This is fascinating. We've been talking about the what and the how of stare decisis, but what does it all actually mean? Why should, our listeners, even if they aren't lawyers, why should they care about this legal principle?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's why understanding stare decisis really matters. These court decisions, these precedents, they're not just, abstract legal theories.
Right.
They shape the world we live in.
This is real.
They impact everything. Our fundamental rights, how our businesses operate.
Yeah, they really do touch every part of our lives if you think about it.
They really, really do.
It's like that old saying, know the rules before you break them. But in this case, it's more like, understand the precedents before you question them.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because by understanding how those precedents are made and sometimes unmade, we become, all of us, more informed citizens, more engaged participants in our own democracy.
Love that.
And that's empowering, don't you think? Seeing the law not as this sort of like fixed, impenetrable thing, it's a reflection of us, our values, our priorities, and how all of that evolves over time.
Right. As society changes, so too do the laws, hopefully.
Hopefully.
So as we kind of start to wrap up our deep dive on stare decisis, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. Think about a law or a rule, something that you think might be, I don't know, ready for a second look. Ready for reconsideration based on, everything we've talked about.
Exactly. Think about it. What's changed in the world since that law, that rule was made? What are the arguments for and against keeping it as is? It's something to really think about. Because who knows, maybe those insights could spark the legal changes of tomorrow.
There you go. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive into stare decisis. We hope you've enjoyed this journey into the fascinating world of legal precedent. Until next time, keep those legal minds sharp. And remember, the law is always evolving.